Hi guys. So Parrot in the Oven, chapter 2. Yesterday we were just kind of introduced to our main character a little bit and his brother, Bernardo, who he calls Nardo. We learned they live in like Central Valley, California, so the Fresno area. And it was a story about them going to pick the chili peppers, and they were with all the other workers in the field. It was really hot. The peppers stung their eyes and their faces and stuff. And then at the end of the chapter, immigration comes and they, they take most of the people that are working in the field. And so it's just basically the people who are there legally that are left. So it just kind of really set a scenario for us. So chapter 2 today is called Rico's Pool Hall. Rico's Pool Hall was Dad's favorite spot in the whole world. Among 4 pool tables made of solid wood, cobwebs of smoke drifting to the ceiling, the air smelling hearty of varnished wood, field sweat, beer, and farts, he breathed easy. All day he talked to his buddies about Mexico and about schemes for making money and escaping back to Mexico, although some of the men there were born in the United States. Kids weren't allowed in the pool hall, but Rico let me stay sometimes while waiting for Dad. I'd sit on a stool at the far end of the bar, watching guys lean against pool cues, smoke, and cuss one another out. I even saw a fight once where a guy threw a cue ball at a man in a Texas hat and smacked his teeth clean off the gums. Because of his drinking and because of the milk she said drained into the gutter whenever he drank, Mom hated to see Dad go to Rico's. She was always dragging me along with her to bring him home. On the day after the chili peppers, we were all piled in the car, my little sister Petty whining about the heat, Magda clapping her hands to the rock and roll music inside her head. Dad complaining about a streak of clever pool shots he was working on before Mom yanked him rudely away. No telling how much money he could have won, he kept saying. Steam puffed from my mouth and my nose ached from the heavy tar smell of melting asphalt. That's when I did a stupid thing. I put my arm on the car door and shouted, "Damn it," as I jerked from the searing metal. Sitting in the front seat, Mom heard me, and before I could plead excuses, she reached over her shoulder and smacked me one on the mouth. There were certain rules that needed no part of a brain's labor for Ma to smack me one. If she'd caught me cursing or breaking a glass, she'd pound my arm. Twice if the curse had anything to do with girls or the glass had milk. Also, whatever gossip could cling to our family for as long as people's memories lasted, I was to avoid. With my dad, it was more simple. If I grew a bit too rowdy, he'd put a vice grip on my shoulder and whisper hot breath inside my ear. "Settle down quick, Manuel," he'd say, or else. Luckily, he was still too soaked from drinking at the pool hall to pay me any mind. He did get into it with the 3 Garcia brothers, though, who were lazing around their front yard. "Que chingados," he exclaimed as we drove into the parking lot. "Those bastards, drinking beer and laughing out of their mouths. They'd suck their mother's last milk if she wasn't dead." Dad was angry at the Garcias for destroying his dream. He had bought this croquet set with which he planned to play with the neighbors while lounging away the hot afternoons. But on the first day we brought it home, the Garcias came over like wild chimpanzees. Bobby wrestled a mallet out of my hands and tossed it into a tree, and Stinky stole a wire wicket while Dad's back was turned. Dad vowed never again to favor our neighborhood with culture. I slunk my chin low while Dad slowed the car and gazed acidly at the Garcias. They pretended these big idiot smiles, and seeing them act so disrespectful, Dad yelled out the window, "Where are your girlfriends? Did you see them off to work for you?" This riled Bobby and Stinky, who were old enough to have girlfriends but didn't. They started pushing their chairs around searching for a rock, but Dad laughed and pumped the gas. He was chuckling under his breath when he pulled up in front of our house made of sheetrock and a gravel tile roof. Shaped like box hotels in a Monopoly set. The houses weren't pretty or stylish, but in spring the grass flowed to every porch like green water lapping against the hulls of houseboats, and that was beautiful. But now it was summer and the heat had sucked the grass blonde. Dad seemed to like his clever joke, so I figured the next best thing for him was to start in about the welfare, and sure enough, he fired his 2 cents into that one. Actually, Mom started him off, so I shouldn't blame Dad totally. She mentioned how some men from the projects were earning money from jobs the welfare gave them. She'd seen them coming home with metal lunch pails and shirts flagging out of their pants. "But you know how the welfare is," Dad said. "They want to know everything. A social worker comes over acting like we're criminals, then the whole neighborhood knows we're getting welfare." He looked dazed, Dad did. Like if you tapped him on the shoulder, he'd bolt off running down the street. Mom just pursed her lips. She knew he was just groping for something to complain about. Besides, half of the projects were already getting welfare and the other half were trying to get on it. This didn't stop Dad, though. "They'll make a copy of my driver's license, Rebecca," he insisted, "and it will stay in their files." After grinding his finger about 50 times in the air, he added, "Besides, I've never done anything in my whole life that would make me beg." "Would you rather let the kids starve?" Mom asked, indignant and, as usual, making a ton of sense. This reddened Dad's face more than the beer had already, but even he knew those canned meats and yellow bricks of butter the welfare gave away wouldn't be half bad. But it was no use. Dad believed Weasley guys already owned the world, and anything you could do to get over on them was useless. He believed people were like money. If you were a $1 million person, you had a grip on things, a big house maybe, and a crowd of suckers you could push around. You could be a $1,000 person or a $100 person, even a $10, $5, or $1 person. Below that, everybody was just nickels and dimes. To my dad, we were pennies. Finally, he slowed down the wheels in his brain. "I'll get a job," he said sullenly. "Don't worry about it. I'll get a job." Then he got out of the car and rushed inside, slinking through the hydraulic screen door. Mom just gazed at the empty space where he had disappeared, then smirked her lips away from her teeth. She'd heard it all before. Ever since he lost his job with the city, every day he'd zoom on about the welfare or about the Garcias or how he was going to get another job, this time on a higher floor. I always wondered why he got so tossed around by things, why he'd roughen his voice and tire himself out complaining. Mom was more quiet. Whenever she worried about something, she'd bite her nails and look up at the sky, not like she was staring at the clouds, but like the whole sky was the most marvelous thing she'd ever seen. When they started shouting and throwing their arms around, which I knew they'd do as soon as Mom walked in through the door, it was best to disappear. Even the walls sweated. Mom's shrieks chased away the panicked air. Dad's voice was coarse paper shredding to pieces. Sometimes I'd climb the elm tree out back or race over to my friend Frankie's where the TV talked all day with nobody listening. As I left, I saw my sister Magda through the window listening to records. She was singing to herself, stabbing her hand in the air like a belly dancer. "Everything's all right. Everything's going to be all right," she sang. I speeded across the parking lot, my eyelids heavy under the sun, grumbling over my mom's criminal unfairness. My lip was pulsing from where she had slapped me, and a swatch of blood smeared when I dabbed it with my fingers. My steps were snapping crisply on the dry shoots of blonde grass when I reached the big lawn, where almost all year round the guys in our projects either smacked a baseball around or ran football plays, while our mothers on plastic chairs visited with one another, drinking iced tea and sprinkling gossip on the backs of those who got up to do chores. Suddenly, a dog crashed out of some side bushes, grunting and hunkering low, froth blowing from his mouth. I was afraid he was going to come clamp his jaws on my leg, but then I saw the Garcia brothers, Bobby, Stinky, and little Tommy, chasing him with sticks. Stinky let fly a rock, and it whizzed past my ear. Whether he was aiming at the dog or me, I wasn't sure, but they sure weren't going to catch the dog. Its paws were practically blistering on the asphalt. The Garcias slowed down to a trot and veered toward me. Stinky, who was sweating enough to drip drops on the ground, was wearing a dingy gray t-shirt and jeans that looked like they'd been scraped with rocks. Little Tommy had on a yellow plaid shirt, and Bobby wore a long green Pendleton shirt with red and gold patterns. His arms were straight at his sides like he didn't want to wrinkle anything, and his mouth crooked funny when his head tilted back. "Hey, it's the Hernandez boy," Bobby said over his shoulder to his brother. Then turning to me, he said, "Hey, Hernandez, I hear your father's got a job in the welfare." I didn't bother denying it. Nothing anybody said could sink in with the Garcias. "Hey, Manny." This time it was Stinky, twisting a stick in his hand, acting like he'd just thought up something terrific. He was in my grade at school, but about 3 years older than everybody else. He had ratty shoulders and 2 large can-opener teeth. His black hair was swatted smooth with pomade, and his voice sounded like 2 knife blades rubbing together. I'd always been afraid of him. Every year at school, he made it a habit of punching me around to show he was still boss. Once he broke a bone in my little finger, and I lied to Mom about it, saying that I got it sliding into second base. Another time, he separated the soft rubber on the bridge of my nose, and I had to tell her I got hit by a pop fly. Stinky was either hitching up his pants or trying to pull a knife out of his back pocket. I couldn't tell. "Where are your girlfriends, huh, Manny? You got any girls on you?" Bobby, the oldest, came over and slung a lazy arm over my shoulder. I thought maybe he wanted to give my head a knuckle burn, but instead he looked into my ear as if peering into a microscope. He started fiddling with the collar of my shirt, twisting it like a necklace around his finger. His breath smelled gamey, of beer and sour pork. "You think your dad could get us some girls, Manny?" he said. "Your dad knows a lot about that, huh?" He pulled on my collar. "What do you say, Manny?" Then he yanked hard again on my collar. I jerked back for balance, but slipped and smashed my hip against the sidewalk. I stood up in an eye blink, not wanting to be lying there with the Garcias around. Inside me, something nodded, began to gel, then jiggle, as if shaking loose from under a trembling light. Even little Tommy could tell I was scared. He was bouncing up and down, his scrawny legs working furiously, his fists clenched above his ears. Stinky shoved his way back in and pressed his palm against my chest. "Hey, Manny," he said, "why don't you fix me a date with your sister, S.A.?" "She doesn't go on dates," I said, but right away I knew I'd made a mistake by talking. "Oh yeah? Why don't she go on dates, huh?" Stinky asked. "What, does she think she's too good for me? Is that it, S.A.? Is she too good for me now?" Stinky's fist was wound tight and he was jabbing it close to my face. I could see little white lightning bolts between his knuckles. "My dad says she's too young." "Too young?" Stinky exploded, fanning open his fingers. He started flinching his arms. "Man, she must be 19 or something." Then little Tommy looked ornery and offended, huffed over, and planted his bony chest against mine. He had a big smudge of dirt on his cheek and a glob of gum stuck in his uncombed hair. He glared at me with his tiny anger, but Stinky wasn't finished and again elbowed his way between us. "Who in the hell does your sister think she is anyways, the Queen of Sheba? I had to kick your frickin' ass right here just to show you no one's too good for me." He slowly cranked back his fist as if to clobber me, but then Bobby, who looked sleepy, like someone had poured Caro syrup over his face, shoved him away. "Get back, Stinky. He's just a punk." "Hey, it's Manny who wants to fight, not me," Stinky exclaimed, exaggerating his voice. "Look, Bobby, he's making a fist at me." When Bobby turned, Stinky steered around him and flung a blow at my chin, his fingers whiffing the air near my nose. "Hey, you want to fight?" he said, stepping back and shuffling his feet around like a boxer did, admiring his moves. Stinky was wild about himself. He began clowning around, winding his arms and bluffing blows at my face. "I'll break your nose again, boy," he said, snapping his fingers. "I'll make that bump on your nose bigger. You'll lose 10 pounds just taking in my punches." Pushing Stinky away, Bobby turned to me with a creamy voice. "What's the matter with you, Manny? Don't you like us?" Just like that, they lost interest in me and started walking across the big lawn toward the yellow projects. A cold ache of fear thawed in my chest, but I didn't move, thinking that if I did, they'd reel around and start bullying me again. When they were a little farther away, Stinky turned around, waving at me like I was his best friend in the whole world, which actually, even after all the times he beat me up, I really think he believed. "Next time I'm going to kick your ass," he said, smiling friendly. I decided to head back home. I didn't want to risk running into them again, and the sky was scarred with clouds shaped like giant hoof marks, but the sun was hot and sputtering on the rim of the horizon. It was like walking into an ocean of heat. When I got home, everything was quiet. I saw Magda through the window of her room, cleaning bits of dust from her records. On the porch, Petty was playing jacks with a golf ball Nardo had stolen from Bonneville Lakes Golf and Catering. I tousled her hair and stepped inside. Dad was sitting on the living room couch, his feet propped on the coffee table, drinking a can of beer and nipping little gulps of tequila from a pint bottle. In the kitchen, Mom was scrubbing the counter. She had her black hair braided into a solid coil in the back and was wearing a flower print apron with the sleeves puffed like biscuits. Mom was wild about daytime movies. When the music on the TV quickened, she'd angle her head through the doorway and watch the action. When there was a lot of talking, she'd scrub hard on the daisy print linoleum. I thought she was going to grab me by the collar and plant me in front of the sink to wash dishes. Instead, she said, "Mijo, you're blocking the TV." "What are you watching?" "A Tony Curtis movie." Standing behind a liquor bar, Tony was rustling ice cubes in a glass and twirling a spoon in suave romantic circles. He glinted his eyes enticingly at some jazzy-looking blonde lady, Marilyn Monroe or somebody, lounging on a billowy couch. The blonde lady didn't suspect a thing, or maybe she did. Mom sure in the hell did. She knew Tony. While I was standing there watching the off-and-on squiggles on the TV, Mom grabbed me by the shoulder and shoved me aside. "Move, mijo," she said, craning her neck. Although sitting close to the TV, Dad was pretending like he wasn't watching. He'd get interested in the parts where Mom's eyes glued on Tony, though. He'd stretch his leg across the coffee table to black out part of the screen, and knowing this annoyed her, although she was trying hard to ignore him. After a while, Mom came into the living room like gravity was pulling at her. She sat on the arm of the couch and propped her chin on her palms. So close was Tony to the blonde lady that you could practically zipper their eyelashes together. That's when Dad got up, snatching angrily at the air, and huffed into the bathroom. He washed, slapped on aftershave, and smoothed his hair back with red rose brilliantine. He came out wearing a white shirt and black pants like he was dressing for a funeral. Fat chance he was going to stick around to watch Tony smooch with the blonde lady while Mom swooned. He was heading back to Rico's to see if he could connect again with his lucky shooting streak. He stood over Mom for about a minute to see if she'd lift her eyes, then grinned meanly, grabbed his keys and pint of tequila, and stormed out. Mom just kept watching the TV. I guess she figured she could scold him for starving us, scold him about the unpaid rent or the job somewhere in the world waiting for him to try harder, but she was tired of all that. She knew if she cluttered his ears with too much gripping, it would only thicken his stubbornness. He'd smolder around the house for hours, grumbling and harrying until he gnawed her patience down to shreds. Outside, I heard the car starter winding, but it wouldn't kick over. God damn it, Dad shouted. I pushed the curtains back and saw him wrestling with the arm of the gear shift, which sometimes stuck. He slammed his feet on the floor and shook the wheel. Then, relaxing his hands, he stared hard at me, like I was weeds growing wild in a field that someday he'd have to chop. Mom came up behind me and pressed down on my shoulders, her hands smelling of ammonia. We watched as Dad got out of the car and walked across the parking lot, grumbling. The hoof-marked clouds in the sky had burned away, and already I could see the wind beginning to smooth out the wrinkles of the afternoon heat. Petty was still on the porch, erasing some sparrow tracks on the dusty concrete. Two of the Garcia brothers, Bobby and Stinky, snuck out from behind our neighbor Sophie's house and followed Dad, laughing and shoving each other with dares. They threw little pieces of gravel at him, trying to land them inside his neck collar, but he only swiped at the air behind his head and kept walking. I turned around and saw the thick cords on Mom's neck pulsing. She looked at me and with a funny smile squeezed her fingers against my cheeks, sparking tiny needles of pain. When she let go, my face stung with a glowing warmth. So that was chapter 2. So basically we're just kind of learning a little more about the family. Sounds like Dad might have a little bit of a drinking problem, and we definitely know Dad's not working, and that's an issue. The family lives, in the projects. They don't have any money. Dad doesn't want to get on what they call welfare for assistance or anything. So I will post this in Google Classroom with some discussion questions for you guys, and we'll do chapter 3 tomorrow. Okay, bye.